Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Canty, and this is another episode of Living Enlightened Every Day. I'm dedicated to guiding others into integrating spirit, mind, and body so they can experience a life of genuine fulfillment, purpose, and passion, regardless of the circumstances they are facing. And I love finding people who are out in the world doing just that. And today we are diving into the profound insights of Dr. Eben Alexander, the best-selling author of Proof of Heaven, which describes his remarkable near-death experience. After a life-threatening illness left him in a 7-day coma, Dr. Alexander returned to consciousness with mind-blowing revelations and insights about the true nature of reality. As a medical doctor and neurosurgeon, his experience challenged everything many thought they knew about the brain and consciousness. He answers the hard problem of science. If consciousness isn't produced by the brain, where does it come from? Let's ask him. As we begin, I encourage you to pause for a moment, to take a deep breath and let yourself become fully present, to quiet your mind and soften your heart, and let yourself be open to whatever wisdom and insights come through for you, the listener today. This time is for you. So let's journey together with Dr. Eben Alexander with intention. So, welcome, Dr. Eben Alexander.
Elizabeth, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you. And first, I just want to acknowledge your first book. I know you've written two others. We're going to talk about them, but that first book, Proof of Heaven, and the profound impact it had for so many people, as well as your continued impact, because that was 20 something years ago, yes?
Well, the Coma was about 15 and a half years ago,
Okay.
and the
Oh,
book
that's right.
Proof of
That's right.
Heaven came out about 12 years ago.
12 years ago. That's
Right.
what it is. And we were talking just a moment before about how our culture, we're conditioned uh, to believe in this purely materialistic paradigm where the physical world, what we can see, taste, touch, and measure, is really the only reality. And I think the intrigue surrounding near-death experiences stems from the comfort that they offer, that reassurance that life continues beyond the physical. And you talk about it so eloquently in all your books that we are in essentially timeless, eternal beings. And in case people don't know, your first book, Proof of Heaven, was particularly influential. It wasn't just your profound near-death experience or your background as a neurosurgeon, or your remarkable recovery, or the way you shared your journey so eloquently that resonated so deeply with so many. It was all of it together had this incredible impact. And it opened a door, I believe, that is now swung wide open to help people understand the greater dimension of life that you speak so much about. And I hate to take you back to the beginning, but I'd love to start with that description of your life before your near death experience as an MD. What were your beliefs about life after death?
Well, I would say I was very much influenced by my adoptive father. Um, he was a globally renowned neurosurgeon, just tremendously important in my life, obviously a great mentor. And he had grown up during the Depression. He had been a combat surgeon in the Second World War. It was his very strong belief in God that I think got him through World War II relatively unscathed, even after 2 years in the Pacific Theater. In fact, I still have on my bedside table the little pocket Bible of New Testament and Psalms that he took with him to war. Now, he was very scientific. He came back and headed up a neurosurgical training program. He was fully versed in modern science. But for him, there was never any conflict whatsoever uh, between his uh, belief and knowing in the reality of a loving personal God and power of prayer, which he used a lot in his work as a neurosurgeon, um, and the science that he had studied. Now, like so many others who grew up in the 60s and 70s, like I did, science I knew early on was the pathway to truth. I made the same mistake that other people make in thinking that materialist science, physicalism, that the notion that only the physical stuff of this universe exists. I was seduced into that too. And it turns out that's very misleading because you end up ignoring the one thing that we all truly know exists, and that's conscious awareness. And in fact, conscious awareness cannot be explained by that simplistic and kind of bleak and paltry fiction of materialism that I had studied my whole life. And my near death experience was simply a major exclamation mark to show me that I'm much more than just, birth to death, a physical body, the things going on in this brain. We're all much more than that because for one thing, consciousness is not created by the brain at all. The brain is serving as a filter or transceiver to allow a primordial unified consciousness, of which we are all part, into our awareness. And this is where it starts to get very exciting, and especially when you recognize that there's also a very active program called program forgetting, such that it's been noted many a time that children can have memories of lives they've lived before. And of course, in our culture, people say that's nonsense, that's impossible. And so they dismiss it. And yet, if you study those cases of children who seem to remember past lives, you end up encountering many of them are true. They're absolutely reincarnations of people who have lived before. In fact, if you go to uvabops.org, you start seeing that. So, anyway, this is all knowledge I did not have at the time.
Right.
Okay. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit. But the me before coma was the one who had wanted to believe what I heard in Methodist Church in North Carolina all those years my dad took me there, that there was an afterlife. And yet, as a practicing neurosurgeon, I had great difficulty understanding, uh, how consciousness could survive the death of the brain and body. And my NDE showed me very clearly through an especially deep dive that is the reality that's there for all of us. And but that's who I was going in. I had spent 54 years of my life honing a scientific worldview. I had tried, to entertain spirituality beyond materialism, but I really had trouble figuring out how it all worked. And that's why my NDE, I think, was such a gift. And come to recognize today in the current era that science itself is admitting that materialism and physicalism is false. And that is all through the awarding of the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2022 for entanglement. Entanglement reveals the connectedness of the mental layer of the universe. And it's something that is right there, along with John Wheeler, a renowned quantum physicist, his pronouncement of the participatory anthropic principle. All of it is about admitting the primacy of mind, that it's not simply derivative from the physical stuff of the brain. And this is where the discussion starts to get very exciting. And this is where the scientific world is actually in the midst of a gigantic paradigm shift and revolution towards acknowledgement of the oneness of mind, how we're all connected through this, that binding force of love that is so obvious in near-death experiences is a fundamental part of understanding it all. And, once I figured out how my journey, because of the nature of my meningitis, a severe bacterial meningitis that should have disabled any kind of dream or hallucination. And yet I had this incredibly profound, memorable, detailed, transformational set of events that I described in the book Proof of Heaven during that week in coma. So it was all a tremendous gift to me, and led to a 180-degree shift away from the simplistic nonsense of materialism and the notion that we're birth to death, nothing more. When our body dies, it's the end of conscious awareness. That's not true. And the evidence is all around. And it's not just NDEs, but we can talk about much more that contributes in the scientific study of consciousness to elaborate this oneness of mind that we all share.
Mm. I love that. And I love that you are so passionate, and you mention it often in your interviews, and you've started to do it here, of listing some of these, the very credible research that is done that's kind of rooted now in what I would call quantum physics or mechanics or the ideas of that. I'm not well versed in it, but it really does, what I know, the little that I know, support just oneness. There's only one. It's never, it doesn't die and disappear, and it doesn't come from nothing. It's all just transitioning, and that's really presented in your book. But you just said something, and it reminded me of what you said in that book. I know you talk about it all the time, and that is the message that you are loved dearly and incredibly, and you have nothing to fear, because again, I think you hit on the three things, and then you can do no wrong. Those are the three things that we have in our human condition that really paralyze us, I think, for much of our lives, where we're not living fully, we're not living our passion because we feel like we have to do this, or we can't really express ourselves because it's not that acceptable in my community or in my family. Whatever it is, you brought back as this powerful message: you are dearly loved, you have nothing to fear, and you can do no wrong. Can you tell us some more about that?
Yes, well, in fact, I think that was the main message I was to bring back. So even though there's a lot of story in Proof of Heaven and in my recounting of the events of that week, and yet the ultimate message, I think, and that came to me kind of at the middle layer of my journey. I'd gone from the Earth, where my view, a very primitive core starting point, up through a brilliant light portal into this brilliant ultra real gateway valley, a realm where you're completely outside of time. That's where people would have life reviews. So, example, birth, death, everything in between could be simultaneously presented to you in this incredible realm um, that I call the Gateway Valley. And I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing in that valley, and there were millions of other butterflies. And down below us were thousands of souls dancing in the meadow, lots of joy and merriment, all being fueled because up above were these swooping orbs of angelic choirs who were emanating chants, anthems, hymns that would just thunder through my awareness and certainly enliven this entire scene. But the best part was I wasn't alone on the butterfly wing. I had a beautiful spiritual guide or companion. And those who've read the book Proof of Heaven will realize how important she was in the bigger understanding of the reality of the story. Because 4 months after my coma, when I received a picture in the mail related to my adoption history, that's when, oh my God, I recognized who that beautiful guardian angel was. But when it all happened, I didn't know her. And that, of course, was a big mystery. But the message that she gave to me, which was purely conceptual and delivered purely mentally, she never had to speak a word. Um, it was exactly as you say. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You're richly cared for. You can do no wrong. Now, I wish I'd explained that last part a little better in the book Proof of Heaven, because where I was at that point, having gotten there, I recognized the ambience of pure love throughout that realm. So that when we have our life reviews, if you've handed out pain or suffering to others, been greedy or selfish, in the brilliant, loving light of oneness of that realm, those actions can look especially, wrong. I mean, that's not what we're here to do, is mistreat others and, treat others in ways other than how we would like to be treated. It's a point I often make about near-death experiences. Is the life review is basically the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated, written into the very fabric of the universe. And that's why
Okay,
it's so
wait. Oh,
important
I'm
to acknowledge.
sorry. You have to say that one more time. That's really profound.
It is astonishing. It's right at the heart of why this discussion is of great importance to the world at large today. And that
Yes.
is the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the very fabric of the cosmos in the form of life reviews. Life reviews, your life flashing before your eyes, which happens in anywhere from 25 to 50% of near death experience accounts, depending on the series, but they're quite common. And the life review is Bruce Grayson, who's an MD who studied these for more than 45 years, a very skeptical psychiatrist, but he's come to believe in the reality of all this because all the evidence points that way. But in a paper that he published in Journal of Near-Death Studies in the fall of 2021, he made it clear in around 700 cases of life reviews that he had in his database that something like 3/4 of people reported that it was a reliving of events from the perspective of everyone involved. That's very important. So if you've been busy handing out pain and suffering to others, in your life review, you're on the receiving end of that. And if what you've done to others doesn't feel good, you're going to pick that up in that life review. The life reviews ultimately nudge us towards loving kindness, compassion, and acceptance with our fellow beings. And in fact, there's kind of a background over the last 50 or 60 years of violent crime and property crime and warfare and battlefield deaths, all those things getting better and better, improving, because mankind, humankind, is somehow kind of getting this message. And I think that especially with the awakening of scientific study of near-death experiences, which we've absolutely seen in the last decade or so, decade and a half, that awakening is something that involves many other fields of study, but all of it comes to corroborate, validate, and affirm the reality of our consciousness not being coming to an end with the death of the physical body. In fact, it's like we're liberated from the shackles of the prison. So your awareness actually becomes greater as you're going through that dying process. That's what near-death experiencers have been explaining for thousands of years across all cultures. So just an incredibly important message coming from the NDE community. But again, like in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, our third book, we go a long way towards taking many, many, many different approaches to looking at consciousness. And through the principle of consilience, where you represent the primacy of consciousness in each of these theaters of investigation, that's where it gets exciting. So you have the what's called the hard problem of consciousness in materialist science, which is basically an impossible problem of trying to explain consciousness based on the interactions of physical matter alone. It doesn't work. Then you've got the binding problem, the apparent unity of consciousness in an individual, which is very hard to explain from a materialist viewpoint, trying to put multiple neuronal populations that somehow assemble this knowledge in this holistic form. How does that happen? Best explained through the primacy of consciousness. Then you have all the evidence for non-local consciousness out of parapsychology, telepathy, something like 35% of identical twins have very powerful telepathic experiences. One twin can touch a hot stove. The other twin 1,000 miles away can feel pain and develop a blister. These are well described and documented events. And of course, it's not just identical twins, although they, because of their identical DNA and kind of very similar nervous systems and resonance, they have a way of trading this information across space and time in ways that our materialist science has no way of explaining, but the emerging scientific models are wide awake to. And then, of course, you have all these other examples of non-local consciousness, like near-death experiences, shared death experiences, which are just like near-death, but involve perfectly healthy people. So you can't use those materialist pseudo arguments of low oxygen tension or CO2 buildup, et cetera. But anyway, all I'm trying to say is this, and quantum physics, as you mentioned, is right there at the core of it. Because for a century or more, those who were very intelligently investigating quantum physics have acknowledged that consciousness appears to be primary and fundamental and united in the universe, and not some curious epiphenomenon of the workings of the brain. And like I said, that Nobel Prize in 2022 for entanglement was acknowledging as something beyond space and time that has to do with information flow that's related to our mental state and our mental connections with each other and with the universe at large. So this revolution is a paradigm shift in the scientific community, but it's very important for the world at large because it throws the emphasis back on love, kindness, compassion, and mercy, because NDEs are very clear in pointing out when we come back from NDEs, we might be less religious, but more spiritual. We also come in greatly appreciating the binding force of love and how it ties all of us together. And we're here to help each other. and take care of each other. That's ultimately what these deep lessons of NDEs are trying to teach us all.
Well, and you mentioned, in entanglement and the twins. I think I think the reason it's so prevalent in twins is because there's an idea as soon as they're born, oh, you're connected. I mean, literally. And people are reinforcing that their whole lives. Some people dress their twins the same and all those things, cut their hair the same, whatever it is. But for the rest of us, we don't have that sense of that kind of a connection. But if we taught our children that they are deeply connected to everyone around them,
Right.
it makes me wonder what would begin happening with that idea of entanglement and being able to communicate in ways that are not this physical way, like, oh, something's wrong with my mom, I can feel that, I need to give her a call. Like, we would start knowing that that is part of this process, I think, of our evolution, is that we will start knowing more of that the way it's only known in a smaller percentage, I guess I'll say.
Right. Well, I think you're making a very good point. We're all entangled. We're all
Yeah.
interconnected because this one consciousness that's being demonstrated in the modern scientific investigation of the brain-mind relationship is really kind of like a God mind, the mind of the universe, but it just so happens to be a mind that we all share.
Yes.
Now, one of the most important personal steps one can make in kind of working towards this enlightenment and understanding is, first of all, acknowledging the ego and what it does. Now, I like to remind people, Michael Singer in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls that voice in your head the annoying roommate. That's a very appropriate description. That
Yeah.
is not your consciousness. Your
No.
consciousness is a far deeper mystery. Your consciousness is actually the awareness of the voice. The voice in the head is more or less the ego mind for most of us. And it is not your ally in this kind of spiritual awakening and understanding, because the ego mind is not very intelligent. But this is why I encourage people, if you haven't had a near-death experience of your own, you don't have to get this kind of knowledge, but you do benefit from starting to consciously and attentively and intentively explore consciousness through, centering prayer, meditation. And for anyone who needs a tool, if you have trouble turning off that little monkey mind voice in your head in meditation, I have a tool that will help you. It's sacredacoustics.com. Full disclosure, that's the company and website of my partner, Karen Newell. She's also the co-author of the book, Living in a Mindful Universe. She's my wife. We've done a lot of this work together for the last 12 years. And it's a form of differential frequency brainwave entrainment where these sounds interact in your lower brainstem. And I think that's where a lot of the big magic comes from this, because by causing this oscillation, which is what the sacred acoustics tones do, it allows us to be liberated from here, now, and sense of self. And that can be a very powerful tool in meditation. So when I do meditation, I meditate an hour to a day. I've been doing that for more than 12 years. Sacred acoustics has been extremely important in my very effective meditations. Although whatever technique you have, do it. But the techniques must always involve putting that little ego voice into timeout and investigating across the veil into that primordial mind. In essence, you're trying to get into a hypnagogic state, like being between awake and asleep. And it's, in many ways, I liken it to a form of lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
But you're definitely putting yourself in a position where that little voice in the head is no longer trying to dictate a pathway. And for me, all meditations begin with the voice in my head, Eben Alexander's little ego mind, making a request, stating an intention, but then it's learned to get out of the way. Once it states the question or intention or what have you, I then just ride those tones of sacred acoustics. And before I know it, I'm very far away from here, now, and sense of self, exploring what kind of wisdom the universe is trying to show to me to help me to kind of come to some resolution of that question or intention or what have you that I mentioned at the beginning of the meditation. But these are all techniques that any of us can use. If you go to sacredacoustics.com, you'll find a testimonials page and a lot of tremendous benefits that people have got through this. And also, one thing that I think Elizabeth listed on your show notes for this was the free 33-day journey at ebenalexander.com. And we
Yes.
highly encourage people to take that. That's actually a free workbook that goes with Living in a Mindful Universe, our third book about all the science and spirituality being united. Um, but I think that 33-day journey is a real gift to many people. It's a 33-day email drip campaign. Each day you get a separate email of a major concept out of the book, often with a meditative approach. And four of them, I think, come with sacred acoustics meditations that are part of the package of the 33-day journey. More than 12,000 people have taken that course over the last few years. They leave their own comments and experiences, etc., in the comment section. So there's a big community growing up in that 33-day journey. I would highly encourage people to get on board and start that if you want to get going in this kind of exploration in your own lifetime.
Well, I love that. You've answered two of my questions. One was, what do we do if we're not having a near-death experience? So you've answered that. Do the work, do a practice, find what you can do to get the ego out of the way, and you've mentioned those. And the other was, even in your book, you mentioned, and you mentioned on your website and other places, and just now, the hemisync or the binaural beats and the music, and I love that. I found that to be so helpful for me personally. So I'm glad that those are very powerful techniques that you recommend.
Well, so
So,
glad to hear that you've benefited from it.
oh, so much. It's sometimes I feel like it's cheating.
Well, it does seem
And I'm
sometimes
okay
it
with
does
that.
seem to make it a little too easy, yeah. But it's just because naturally we can do this, and it's who we are. It's one of the reasons why I think people enjoy sacred acoustics so much. And there's also, just for those who want the evidence, there's a very good pilot study in a peer-reviewed journal supporting the use of sacred acoustics at very successfully alleviating anxiety in our modern world. The study was by Dr. Anna Yusim, YUSIM. It came out in the February 2020 Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, and it basically notes a 26% reduction in anxiety symptoms over 2 weeks of
Wow.
listening to sacred acoustics tones versus only a 7% reduction in the control group who basically got standard talk therapy for psychiatry over those 2 weeks. So 26% just by listening to tones versus 7% reduction, through standard therapy. That's a giant benefit of sacred acoustics. And I promise you, getting rid of anxiety is just the beginning. In our modern world, anxiety is right there as the main tool of the ego. Anxiety and fear. That's what the ego uses to try and kind of control our lives and manipulate us in a certain direction. And it used to be useful way back in the olden days of predator, prey, all that. But the ego doesn't serve that useful a purpose in our modern living. And it's humanity is awakened to a point where many of us can glean these beautiful lessons of oneness, connection, love, and the comfort that it all brings, and also the lessons of eternity of soul, and that we're here for much grander reasons than we might think, just kind of musing over the ego's interests in existence. But the higher soul is very much involved in the evolution of all consciousness and in promoting, societal harmony and coming together. And that's what we're really witnessing, is how the ego and that false sense of separation that is so inherent in materialism is leading us towards a demise of life on earth. I mean, the greed of the oil companies and coal companies, for example, is one reason why we're in such trouble with climate change right now. And when I was in training back in the 70s and 80s, we used to think climate change was only going to be a problem for our children, grandchildren, great grandchildren. But now we've done such a bad job of handling it, and we keep burning fossil fuels. The storms get worse, the droughts, the floods, the fires, every bit of it is getting worse because of our addiction, fossil fuel, driven by corporate greed in oil executives and coal executives. So it's time to move to the next level. We need to take care of this planet and be much better stewards. And that involves awakening along the lines of what we're discussing today, this paradigm shift and this putting consciousness first and foremost, and admitting the reality of our free will. Oddly enough, our materialist science denies you even have free will. They think it's all chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain.
Well, just tagging on to what you said is that, when we talk about corporate greed or, the government ignoring governments, many of them ignoring climate change, all the different things, and I do like to bring it back to the individual because it's so easy to put this blame on those people out there who are making these decisions and we can't do anything about it. But if we can actually be responsible for our awakening, which is just ours, now we're not awakening a corporation or a government, but if we wake up, we become that catalyst, not just in our singular life that in my little house with my dogs and my family. It's like we actually become that influence because what is a corporation or a government but a bunch of people making decisions, and so we begin to influence them, I think, in the same way that you and your experience influenced and it still continues to influence the medical community and the scientific communities, and as people have their individual awakening, we contribute to the healing. It sounds far-fetched, but it only begins with your first step. And so you're encouraging everyone to take that step to wake up and don't let the enormity of the government or the corporation or the climate change deter you from opening your heart and your mind to your authentic purpose and your connection to all that there is, which includes whatever your idea of God is. So I want to go there too. Like, what is your? How do you talk about this idea of God?
Well, Elizabeth, first I'd like to just comment on what you just said. I love it. You're absolutely right. Each and every one of us has far more power than we believe in bringing good to this world. I remember there was a transcendental meditation study done back, I think, in the late 70s or early 80s that showed that in one community, just by having 3% of the people in that community start meditating, they started seeing a very dramatic improvement in their local crime rates and in any kind of violence of people against people. So I think that just meditating and promoting that soft, harmonious space within ultimately influences our external reality very strongly. Um, and then in your question of God, I love this. It's a beautiful question. First of all, I will remind people that more than 90% of people who have had near-death experiences, and this goes back thousands of years across all continents and belief systems, many of these people had previously been atheist or agnostic. More than 90% of near-death experiencers come back to this world not only believing in, but knowing from personal experience in the reality of a very positive, loving force at the core of the universe. Now, I recognize when I came back to this world, it was clear to me that it wasn't a question of whether you wanted to call that deity God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit, all the many names that people attach. And so it's not about a religious ideology and which ideology is correct. It's about coming to the recognition that at the core of all of these beliefs that are talking about this powerful creative force at the core of the universe that is part of our lives, this God force that in the ears have come in direct contact with. In fact, for me, as I ascended through that gateway valley and then into the layer of pure oneness, what I call the core, I recognized that my very conscious awareness was completely sourced in that God force. So it could never be separate from it at all. And I think that's a very important kind of set of lessons for people to get, that this reality of a loving personal force that's there to kind of help us. And it basically represents our consolidated mind at the core. But it's not these ego minds. It's a much deeper kind of eternal soul mind that is involved in the evolution of all consciousness. As Pierre Teilhard de Chardin noted in his mid-20th century book, Phenomenon of Man, that's what's going on here, is a tremendous evolution and transformation. And so a little while ago, when I was talking about all the past life memories in children and the scientific evidence for reincarnation, but because of program forgetting at age 6 or 7, where those memories are covered over, most of us don't have those memories as we get older. And yet the scientific literature on reincarnation is overwhelming. You can't deny it. Go to uvadops.org, University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, and you'll find a tremendous amount of evidence gathered over 6 or 7 decades that our souls come back again and again. And so this is a big picture kind of shift of paradigm, and you can't come at it with a kind of a lowly ant's eye view of the world, but this bigger view, which is available to all of us simply by doing the homework, reading a few sources, watching a few videos, and then starting to meditate, starting to go within, starting to explore this world of conscious awareness. And that God force comes out as absolutely real. In fact, in reviewing for some of the work I'm writing up these days, a week or so ago, I ran into an interesting fact in a study, a survey that was done of Nobel Prize winners of the 20th century. And to me, it was an interesting finding. They noted that if you look at the Nobel Prize in literature and you ask those Nobel laureates, is there a God or not? Do you believe in God? It turns out 5% of those Nobel laureates in literature believe in God. And those are the ones that, of course, are part of the big secular culture. They're writing the fiction that's influencing everybody, et cetera. Now, what about if we ask that same question of people who've won Nobel Prizes in physics, chemistry, and medicine? Well, there, what you find is 35% of the Nobel Prize winners believe in God. So science is what gives you this incredible kind of, oh my God, about God being real. It's, many people think that science debunks spirituality and religion. In fact, it fully supports the reality of a God force. And to me, that's a very important statistic. And I promise you, it's only improved in the 21st century. Because of this discussion, which has been very actively going on in scientific circles. And all the evidence is very affirmatively showing the reality. For anyone else who needs deeper scientific data on that, beyond our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, and the other sources I've mentioned, I would recommend go to bigelowinstitute.org. And that's what you'll find 29 essays written by scientists 3 years ago in a contest. All to answer the question of the scientific evidence for ongoing conscious awareness after permanent bodily death. And bigelowinstitute.org very affirmatively answers that question. The afterlife is absolutely real. Reincarnation is a huge part of human existence. This is scientifically validated. You can continue in willful ignorance if you want to defend materialism, but the science doesn't defend materialism at all. Materialism is dead as far as the modern science of quantum physics and brain-mind connection is taking us. So it's a very exciting time to be alive.
I think so too. I think so too. I think the world is ready for this idea that quantum mechanics presents, and that is of entanglement, of connection, of a God source, life force, divine energy, and creativity. There isn't a word that would describe it well, but it's we can just list all of them and say that would be it. And people are ready. I feel like the anxiety of our culture and communities, the fear, the way we've gotten away, further and further away from sort of family and connection and community and neighbors and pets and animals and eating real food. It's kind of spread so far out that I feel like it's kind of contracting again, going back to, and it's not back to, it's forward into a greater understanding.
Well, I
And
agree with you. I think this is a paradigm shift that in many ways has been 5,000 years or more in the making. This
yeah,
is not just about resolving issues of the last decade or two. It's really about coming to a deeper understanding than humans have had in ages. And to me, it's kind of fascinating that with all this scientific proof, what you're absolutely doing is confirming and validating deep, profound truths that were gleaned by spiritual journeyers thousands of years ago about oneness, about the reality of a binding force of love. I mean, these are kind of the bread and butter of what comes out of near-death experiences and the scientific investigation of them. In many ways, NDEs are the tip of the spear, but you contribute to this knowledge from many other areas other than NDEs. And that's how we do it in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe.
Hmm,
Uh,
yeah.
that whole idea of consilience and when you invoke the quantum physics and the parapsychological evidence of non-local consciousness, things like remote viewing,
Yes.
distance healing, power of prayer, these have all been well documented to show the power of mind or spirit over matter. And to me, one of the most important issues is healing, coming into wholeness.
Yes. Yeah.
And doctors have admitted for 6 or 7 decades the role of placebo effect, which is simply acknowledging that one's wishes, thoughts, and attitudes can influence their health and healing. But it goes far beyond that. We can move beyond placebo, talk about spontaneous remissions, which are a very powerful category of demonstrating the power of mind or spirit over matter. And the best examples are those of miraculous healing in near death experiences, like my case. There's a medical case report written on my medical records that came out um, in February 2018, Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases. And that case report makes it very clear my brain was in no shape to harbor a dream or hallucination, much less the incredibly rich spiritual journey I had. But the other important thing about that case report is when the three authors, who were not involved in my care but were fascinated by my recovery, when they were challenged by the scientific peer review editors of the journal, how do you explain this case? It's unprecedented in medical literature for someone to spend a week in coma with these kind of medical parameters this close to death from E. coli bacterial meningoencephalitis involving all lobes of the brain. How do you explain the recovery? A full recovery over 2 months. And they said it's because he had a near death experience. So for the peer review editors,
Oh,
yep, okay, now we have an explanation. So they move along. But they knew of other cases like Anita Moorjani, who wrote the book Dying to Be Me, and she healed her advanced stage 4 lymphoma through a near death experience, through a profound spiritual journey. Likewise, Dr. Mary C. Neal, she wrote the book To Heaven and Back, orthopedic surgeon in a kayaking accident in Chile in the late 1990s. Uh, Legs broken, jammed underwater for more than 30 minutes. She was brought to the surface dead, but they resuscitated her. She made a full recovery and ended up going around the world like I do. I presented with both these beautiful women who share their experiences just as I do. NDE, the NDE literature has many other cases of healing that just goes beyond anything we would expect in modern medicine. So if you're interested in coming into wholeness and healing, learning life purpose and how it overlaps with that of the universe at large, start meditating, going to centering prayer, learning more about all this. But remember, ultimately, this material world is where we get the work done. So
right.
the meditation is great for informing us, but it's really about bringing those lessons of love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, when necessary, forgiveness, into how we live these lives, how we deal with ourselves, how we deal with all of our fellow beings. Every bit of it is influenced by this incredible enrichment of understanding of the primacy of mind and the binding force of love that brings us all together.
Beautiful. And you said that if you want healing, to begin meditating. And what I want to point out is, as you're meditating, and if you're a beginner, it doesn't even matter if you're new to it. But that's why I know the binaural beats, the sacred sound that you use. Those things really help beginners in particular, but all of us at different times of our lives, or even in our day. If our day becomes hectic, there's certain things. If I know I have a lot of stress going on, I do a different kind of meditation. I have to use my body because my body won't sit still. It just won't be still. But the point I was going to say with what you were saying is that as we become still, we don't need to nearly die to get that information that you got. It's is what you're sharing with us is we when we are connecting, when we're releasing, allowing the ego to sit, I say, in the back seat, just being like a
Right.
toddler going to sleep in the car as you're driving around the block, going to sleep. Then you get to reconnect with the reality of all of who you are, and then the information of what you need in your earthly reality can come through, because as you say, we're all connected to source. We're all connected to, I would say, people like your angel, your sister. And we have our angel guides, our spirit guides, whatever, people who have passed before, people who love us dearly, we can be connected to that, but not while we're running around being afraid or, in this contracted or constricted state. So I think that's really why you're advising people to take the time to be still and know who you truly are.
Right. And the universe shows us that when we get into those deep meditative states. That's the kind of material it starts to put into our awareness. I've started encountering what I came to recognize as probably kind of past life events for me, deep in meditation. And I began a very active daily meditation regime beginning about 2 years post coma. I'd read about 150 books, quantum physics, spiritual traditions, East and West, trying to make sense of my near death experience, and none of it was working. And I knew truly to get at it, I had to actively meditate,
Mm.
to explore consciousness and see what this was that people were talking about. And it's been a beautiful journey. I will confess, I've many a time gotten back into my NDE. In fact, I talk about in the book Living in a Mindful Universe, I talk about how I had not seen my adoptive father's soul in my near death experience. He had passed over 4 years before my coma. And it was actually in a meditative experience using binaural beat brainwave entrainment about 2.25 years post coma that I finally did encounter my father. And he made it very clear why he couldn't be there. That I would have been more tempted to dismiss it as, oh, yeah, you see who you want to see on the way out. That's why I needed a whole deeper level of my spiritual guardian angel, someone I'd never met in life, and yet someone very important to me in my existence. And that's exactly what happened. But meditation is what opens the doors for these kinds of things and for this kind of awareness. So when events happen in the meditation, you can ask in the next meditation, why did I see that? How come that particular vision was there? And the universe has a way of building on the information it feeds us for deeper understanding as we come into the growth and transformation that's inherent in this kind of meditative experience. But for me, it's been a tremendous gift. Although I will confess that the ultra reality that was so striking in the Gateway Valley and the core realm during my NDE, I have not yet fully duplicated that sense of ultra reality. But it could be that I have to get back to that level where my brain is that far offline as it was in that meningitis for me to experience a similar kind of expansion of awareness through meditation alone. But it absolutely happened in a profound way during the NDE. And that's kind of a touchstone I have for helping me in all of this investigation and exploration.
I mean, for me personally, people have heard me talk about it. Sometimes it feels, what's the word? The confusion of sort of the daily life of things that are happening, of the bills that come in, or the unexpected diagnosis, or the death of a loved one. And it feels like we can get really stuck in that. And so for me, even meditation feels hard to do. It just feels like it's being squashed, like
Right.
that expansion just becomes harder. But would you say with the practice, with your many years now of practice, do you still experience like that heaviness and then the breaking free in your meditation?
I would say I don't really experience much of the heaviness anymore. I know exactly what you're talking about because it was certainly a feature early on. But I've gotten to a point where I can so easily kind of shift modes when I go into meditation and state an intention or ask a question. I turn it over. I let it go. So whatever kind of heaviness and everything used to kind of potentially emerge at that point really no longer happens. It's this lightness of being that's just part of the meditative experience. And it's another way of saying all is well, because we tend to get all worried about things, and of course, the ego pounds us down with anxiety and fear and all that stuff. And yet, ultimately, our souls, our higher soul, know that we're living in this brilliant light of love and growth, and that's our ultimate being. And it's not something that's going to end up succumbing to the kind of apparent but false dark forces of the materialist mindset and materialist world. because ultimately we know better than that from this personal experience, gleaned through meditation, centering prayer. We know that there's a much higher form of being that we are truly part of. And we're not bogged down by that kind of heaviness that often comes as part of the conditions of accepting any part of the materialist argument about existence. But this is what I love about meditation and centering prayer, and the way it's enabled me to leave all that stuff in the rearview mirror and live in this lightness of being. In fact, the company that Karen and I started is All Is Well Unlimited,
Oh, I
and
love
it's because
that.
we recognize that a deep level, all the little uh, irritations and problems we may have in our little material bodies in the material world, that ultimately we have the power to rise well above them and to harvest the energy and love of the universe for further growth and transformation in a
Mm.
very positive direction that's very harmonious with the evolution of fellow seekers. So we're all in this together. We're here to help each other at multiple levels. But this kind of knowledge and this kind of awareness that can be greatly strengthened through the personal experience of deep meditation and centering prayer is a tremendous gift to liberate us from the kind of heaviness that you're talking about.
Yeah, two things came up for me, and they're both making me smile when you were talking about just kind of releasing and surrendering and the lightness of being. I just had this image of a dog shaking. You know how they shake like crazy and get all the water off of them? Like,
Right,
they're so
exactly.
heavy and their fur and their coat. Now they're just shaking. It's like we just shake a little bit in meditation, and there's this lightness of being.
Absolutely. I love that vision. I'll keep that in mind.
And the second was all is well. I have a quote in the very beginning of my book. I talk about Anthony DeMello's quote, that he talks about all mystics, no matter what religion they are, they end up saying all is well. And it's like, how can you say all is well when everything's a mess? And he's like, all is well and everything's a mess. It's
It's
all.
true, both and you're right. Well, I'll tell one quick little story. When I was coming up out of coma, when I woke up and fought the ventilator and they pulled out the breathing tube, the only thing I knew was where I'd been, that incredible journey over the week. I didn't have any memory of my life before. I didn't even recognize my mother, my sisters, my sons at the bedside, had no idea who these beings were. And my youngest sister, who arrived about 20 minutes after I came out of coma and I was sitting on the bed, she said it was so funny because I'd spent the whole week all worried about me dying. And the doctors, got worse and worse each day of the week. And finally, by that Sunday, the doctors held a conference saying I'd gone from 10% to 2% chance of survival, no chance of recovery. So very bleak. But within 20 minutes of coming out of coma, even though I still didn't recognize these loved ones, I was starting to have vague memories of who they were and how they fit my life. But she said I was sitting on the bed like a little Buddha. And I would look at everyone around, each doctor, nurse, family, friend. I'd look them in the eyes and I'd go, all is well. Don't worry, all is well, just reassuring them. And she said it was just so kind of anomalous coming out of me having just dodged this gigantic bullet of this severe meningitis. And it wasn't all quite well yet, though, because I was in and out of a paranoid delusional psychotic nightmare for the next 36 hours. But bottom line is that was a gift, too, because the memories of the spiritual journey deep in coma, when my brain was totally offline, those memories are as sharp and crisp and detailed today as if the whole thing happened yesterday. Whereas the memories from the kind of 36-hour post extubation, paranoid delusional nightmare, those vanished within weeks. So I'm glad I was busy writing it all down because I have it now as a database. It was my youngest son, majoring in neuroscience at the time, who advised me to write it all down before I read anyone else's near death experience because I'd never paid attention to that literature before. And he was right. He knew that every time you revisit a memory, you change it. And therefore, I better record everything as I recalled it in the moment. And I wrote about 20,000 words. I'm so glad I have that as my raw database. And that's what really all the books have been based on and all of my thinking since then.
Yeah.
So it's been an incredible journey of discovery. But people can learn more at ebenalexander.com and by following, the many talks I've given and certainly your podcast.
You said in your book Something, I don't know if I wrote it down as a quote, but communicating with God is the most extraordinary experience imaginable. Yet at the same time, it's the most natural one because God is present in us all at all times. And that's kind of what we've been talking about this whole time is connecting to that which many of us would call God, Allah, Brahman, whatever we call it, but it's something that we know, I would say, in our deep sense of knowing, not in our everyday knowledge that I studied in school, but that deep sense of knowing um, that we're connected. And don't do you find that that is ultimately that which heals?
Right. That's what takes us into wholeness. You're right on target there. This is what the word healing comes from, the same origin as the word wholeness.
Ah,
So
I
healing
didn't
is
know that.
simply becoming more whole, more of who we came here to be. And when you recognize that that's not necessarily the little ego mind's wannabe self, but that there's a much richer, deeper aspect of higher soul that's interconnected with other souls. And that's the part of us that truly emerges in this journey of self discovery through meditation, centering prayer, and becoming more aware of this kind of discussion, this kind of nature of consciousness as exhibited in modern scientific investigation. All of that is what leads us into a much more comforting sense of reality. And the interesting thing is that it seems to be our spiritual home. I mean, as I contacted this more and more in meditation, it seemed, much more like, oh yes, now I remember. Oh yes, and it starts kind of bringing you up to that level. I mean, I cannot explain why there is program forgetting, and why we're not meant to be able to bring all the knowledge we glean in these deep journeys back to this world. It's probably for the same reason that we're not necessarily meant to remember our dreams. Unless you actively try to recall a dream when you wake up, it's going to dissipate. And yet, dreams are very important, not just for humans, but dreaming in sleep is very important way down the animal chain. Science doesn't yet know why. And yet,
Yeah.
it seems to have a tremendous amount of kind of connecting us to that spiritual self, that kind of non material self. And I think that's ultimately what we can achieve through meditation and centering prayer. Is this form of lucid dreaming that educates us about our relationship with the universe at large and a shared sense of meaning and purpose.
Mm. But yes, on that realm of wholeness and healing, I did not know that they shared bit of the same root, but that makes perfect sense. And it
Right.
reminded me of something that Ram Dass said that was very profound for me personally. And it was after his stroke, and he said, "Healing does not mean going back to the way things were. It is moving us closer to." I think he used the word God, but we can say wholeness
Right.
is moving us
Absolutely.
to
Well, that's a
wholeness.
beautiful way of putting it.
Isn't that?
I had the great pleasure of meeting Ram Dass and spending some time with him in Hawaii back in 2013. Karen and I both did. And what a enlivened soul. I mean,
Wow.
he had the stroke, still had some of the effects of the stroke, and yet he just beamed with this incredible energy. I mean, you could see the God force alive and well in him, and it was a force of wholeness and a force of
Yeah.
healing. So just a beautiful thing to share.
Oh, yeah, I love that. Well, thank you for inspiring me to that remembrance. That healing is wholeness, but wholeness isn't what the ego sees. It is really the truth of our being
Mm,
and allowing ourselves to surrender. That's one of the first things you mentioned, to surrender to what the experience is that we are in. We're in it
right.
for some reason, but we can't remember the reason.
Well, and I would simply add, in coming back from my coma and in looking back on my life and the events of my life, another thing I recognize that in many ways the gifts the universe offer to us appear in the form of hardships and challenges. So those are not to be kind of rejected and questioned as much as embraced. We're here to learn, and some of the greatest lessons come through adversity. Tough people, often they're near and dear soul mates, and we're both trying to teach each other such important lessons that they're kind of challenging to our ego minds. And yet at a deeper, higher soul level, we say, oh yes, well, this is the direction I'm supposed to go, to open up with love in that fashion. So remember that many hardships and challenges are to be embraced because they're there to serve in our growth and transformation as higher souls.
Mm, thank you. It's a perfect place to end this conversation. It's been so uplifting. Your books are so inspiring. They're just beautifully written. If anyone wants to geek out on the science, that you're full of that. You have all this wonderful research, and I do believe with you that we are emerging into a new paradigm of understanding of of the world, and as it should be. It's like we used to think the world was flat, and
Right.
we've moved on, and we used to think that the earth was the center of the universe, and we've moved on. And so we're moving on, and in that in and of itself is allowing, I think, so much healing on the planet. So I just
Right.
really bless you and your wife for all that you've done, and for these incredible books and experiences that you've shared with us.
Well, thanks so much. And the only other site I would mention for anybody who wants to keep up with us is innersanctumcenter.com. That's INNER sanctumcenter.com. And that it's kind of self-explanatory as you go there. There are more than 50 interviews we did during the pandemic with thought leaders around the world on consciousness, other experiencers, et cetera. Those 50 plus interviews are available for free at innersanctumcenter.com. Also, a monthly webinar we do is available there, and a mental health practitioner course we did with Dr. Anna Usum. I mentioned a little while ago, but we did a professional healing course with her that's available at innersanctumcenter.com, although that does come with a certain cost attached to it for the professionals wanting to take it.
Oh, lovely. Well, I just invite the listeners to reach out to you with the questions and comments that you've said. They can reach you on your website, ebenalexander.com. And I just can imagine that so many people can really relate to this question of what really happens to us when our body leaves this earthly plane, or when our body is just no longer serving us in this realm.
Mhm.
And it's very powerful to sit with these questions that all of us have as humans, and take the help where it comes from Eben Alexander's books, or from these websites. And his books, by the way, Proof of Heaven, Map of Heaven, and Living in a Mindful Universe, of course, are available on Amazon or on his website. And all these websites that he's listed will be in the show notes. so so don't be afraid if you didn't catch him as he was describing them to you. But be sure and hit the like button and subscribe, and share this with a friend. Maybe they're ready to take that quantum leap into really knowing the truth of their being, and really understanding their wholeness and oneness in this universe. So many incredible insights shared today. I'm so grateful.
Well, thank you,
Oh,
Elizabeth. It's been great talking with you. I really appreciate it and appreciate what you do getting this out to the world. Thank you so much.
thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm Elizabeth Canty. Join me every week for a new insight into how we can love our life and live our passion. And just remember to laugh, love, and live enlightened every single day. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm going to ask, are you ready to elevate your life? In my book, Living Enlightened, The Joy of Integrating Spirit, Mind, and Body, you'll find inspiring, practical tools to integrate spiritual principles into your everyday life. Because remember, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So, whether you're seeking inner peace, clarity, or a deeper connection to yourself, which is what we talked about in this incredible podcast, this book is your guide to unlocking true joy and wholeness. So get your copy today at Amazon.com or on my website, elizabethcanty.com.